Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Walton, and I'm a Director of Advisory Services here at LRN. I'd like to welcome all of you to the latest installment of our LRN webinar series, the 2025 Code of Conduct Report, Employee Insights and Emerging Trends. For the next hour, we're going to be sharing with you some key findings from our just released Code of Conduct report. The report is unique in that it looks at the latest trends in code of conduct development and deployment over the past 2 to 3 years, and also provides insights into how employees perceive and interact with their company's codes of conduct. We hope this information will be useful to you as you continue to look for ways to improve your ethics and compliance programs and foster a culture of ethics and compliance within your organizations. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand following the session. All questions will be held until the end of the presentation. Please put any questions that you have into the Q&A window on Zoom. If we're unable to address your question during the live session, a member of our team will follow up with you directly afterwards. I'm so happy to be joined today by two distinguished members of the ethics and compliance community who are on the leading edge of everything we'll be talking about today. I'm pleased to introduce to you Deborah Spanik, Vice President and Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer at Clarios, and Christopher Anand, Senior Director, Ethics and Compliance at Cargill. So for our agenda, we're going to be, it's not advancing. We're going to be reviewing some of the key findings from the report, what's changed since 2023, the last time we looked at these companies, and what do employees think, followed by a Q&A session. As a way of setting the stage for today's discussion, I'd like to review some of the key findings from the report. If you haven't done so already, please download a copy of the report and or either during or after the webinar. For this year's report, we took a second look at nearly 200 codes of conduct of top companies around the world to see what, if anything, has changed since the last time we reviewed them in 2022 and 2023. We also conducted a survey of employees across 15 countries and received over 2,000 responses with some really fascinating insights into how they perceive and interact with their company's codes of conduct. This is the second year in a row that we've taken this employee survey, and so we're going to be looking at some of the trends and the differences from last year to this year. So the first set of insights is kind of the things that we've seen that have changed since the last time we reviewed those particular codes of conduct. First of all, we're seeing an increase in the introduction of AI guidance in the code. It increased from 5% to 15%, but that means that 85% of the codes still do not cover artificial intelligence. And we're going to be digging into that a little bit more in a few minutes. Also, companies are strengthening their reporting and accountability elements in their code. 90% of codes provided clear reporting resources, and 77% included details about their helpline. This will help protect whistleblowers and give clear guidance to employees to raise concerns. Codes are also becoming more user-friendly, with some of the usability features showing meaningful gains from last year to this year. The inclusion of policy links within the code increased by 8 percentage points. The inclusion of resource callouts, definitions, and examples increased by 5 points. and actually the introduction of tables of contents that employees could navigate through increased by 3 points. So all of these things will help employees understand how to act ethically and where to go for more support. One of the things that we found that wasn't really making an increase is the inclusion of knowledge reinforcement aids, such as real life scenarios and Q&As, and that remained at 30%. So when we look at the employee, the things that we're finding that employees are looking at, we're seeing increased code engagement, especially among hybrid employees. 76% of employees who work in a hybrid situation reported that they use their code of conduct as a resource. That's up from 67% the previous year. And it's actually higher for those hybrid employees than it is for employees who work full-time in an office or full-time at home. Employees are also using their codes of conduct more often, which is likely due to the fact that more and more companies are updating their codes annually, including making substantive revisions, making things more clear, and improving the usability of the code. Codes are also being offered in more languages. So 2/3 of employees reported that they actually have access in the code of conduct in their native language. And this aligns with the regulator's guidance to emphasize giving people information, not only in language that they understand, simple language, clear language, but their native language as well. We also found that middle management is lagging in communicating about the code and the importance of acting with ethics and integrity. So you've got 85% of executives saying that they hear from their leaders, and only 53% of frontline employees saying the same. And then finally, web-based codes are gaining traction, with about 1/3 of the survey respondents saying that their company has put their code into a web-based format. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. So this brings us to our first poll question, and you'll see the question pop up on the screen. And the question is, how often does your company review and update your code of conduct? It's either annually, every 2 to 3 years, every 4 to 5 years, or every 6 years or more. So if you could just take a few seconds to put your answer in and submit that, and we'll see where that lands. Okay, so we have about 38% saying annually, every year, which is great. 44% every 2 to 3 years, 14% 4 to 5 years, and 4% every 6 years or more. And this compares pretty well with the results of the survey, which showed that 45% of companies are updating their codes of conduct annually. And this doesn't always mean it's a refresh or a reinvention or a reimagination, but it's really about, you know, including any substantive changes, any regulatory guidance, or new risk that you might have imposed since the previous year. Okay, so I'm going to move to asking our panelists to weigh in on this issue. And I'm going to start with Deborah. And so if you could, when you introduce yourself again, just give us a brief overview of Clarios, but also, you know, tell us about your code review process. How often do you do it? Who's involved in that process?
Happy to do so, Jim. Thank you. Deborah Spanik. I lead the ethics and compliance program here at Clarios. For those of you who don't know, we are the world's largest manufacturer of automotive batteries. In fact, one out of every three cars in the world has a battery that's been manufactured by Clarios. We operate in well over 100 countries, 18,000 employees worldwide. And in terms of the code, we will review our code every year, but we will probably do major, what I'll call a major update revision, sort of, comb through once every 2 to 3 years. It's a pretty big project, not something that we necessarily feel is necessary to do on an annual basis from a complete overhaul. That being said, there have been, on rare occasions, changes in the law or changes in our policies so dramatic where we've had to sort of do an out of cycle update, but those are sort of few and far between. So I'd say we're pretty much right in there with what we saw in terms of the participants.
Great, thank you. And who gets involved in the process of updating the code?
Well, the ethics and compliance team leads that, of course, but it's a cross-functional team. So we have our sustainability group, we have our HR team, we have our legal group, we have manufacturing, we have procurement, the commercial team, kind of across the board. And then, of course, an executive review with a final approval from our board of directors. So it's pretty comprehensive, which is another reason why we only do that level of revision every 2 to 3 years.
That makes a lot of sense. Christopher, the same thing on your side, just a little bit about Cargill, and then if you could talk about your code review and revision process.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jim, and pleasure to be with everybody this morning. Christopher Anand, serve with Cargill Incorporated as Senior Director for our Ethics, Compliance, and Security Office. For us, Cargill primarily falls into the annual category for revising our code of conduct, although I should clarify that answer to say that every two of or every in 2 of every 3 years, we might pursue a larger refresh. So we're certainly not doing a larger refresh every year. It's actually, let me state that better, but 1 out of every 3 years that we'll do a larger refresh. The light refreshes that we do on an annual basis, mainly to capture maybe a change in a policy name, changes in contact information, or if regulations have prompted us to to talk about something more specific in the code that we feel employees need guidance on. And then with each of the larger refreshes that we do, where we might be pursuing a larger kind of design change, we'll try to ensure that at that time, the information that we're putting into the code won't require significant updating on a regular basis. So we do try to have the code certainly have the ability to be updated when needed, but not to have to go through a large refresh process like Deborah spoke to, because same thing with us. If we do a larger refresh, we're going to involve a lot more parties. So I have a contact list of content owners that I keep because I lead most of the refreshes or even mild updates to our code, so that I can reach out to them if we are looking to do maybe a more substantial update to get what changes they might want. Otherwise, they'll reach out to me if there's something minor that needs to be done. Um, our Senior Vice President of Ethics, Compliance, and Security, along with our Chief Compliance Officer, will also get involved and ultimately kind of bless the final changes for some of our larger refreshes. For the most part, we can do those independently without needing to go to the full board, but with one very significant exception, and that is that if we're looking to change anything related to how Cargill's values are spoken to in the code or our guiding principles, we are a private company, one where we have 4 family members of the Cargill and McMillan family, the legacy family that owns the company, sit on our board. And those items do not get changed without their input and, of course, their full approval, because the name of the family still is the name of the company. And yeah, that's pretty much how we do it at Cargill side.
So if you could look back, 3 to 5 years, what's been the evolution of your code of conduct? And I'm kind of thinking more in terms of in the lines of readability, usability, delivery mechanisms, and things like that. That's for Christopher. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jim.
Yeah,
Wasn't exactly sure who got to
yeah,
answer
yeah,
first.
yeah.
So I would divide the largest changes over the past 3 years really in terms of one being kind of a risk topic, much more focus on a particular risk topic, and then an overall approach that we're taking to what the code is meant to be in as a resource to employees. So from a risk topic perspective, probably the largest risk we've been addressing in the code of late has been conflicts of interest. We're a global company. We do business in 70 different countries across the world. And while in the United States and certain other geographies, the concept of a conflict of interest is not a hard one to necessarily understand, in other places, there may be some cultural differences that we have to explain what is a conflict and what isn't. So we've made a concentrated effort to really look at the language of how conflicts are referred to in the code and expand that section a little more than it has been in the past to try and offer more guidance. And that really ties into the second deliberate action with the larger redesign that we did to our code not that long ago. And that is having the code serve as in essence a traffic cop to get people to the right tools. With conflicts of interest, it's all about disclosure. If you disclose something before you enter a situation that's a conflict, there's an opportunity for compliance to provide guidance and make sure that you as an employee aren't getting yourself into trouble. So the code is meant to be the initial place where employees look for guidance, get kind of the general guidance on a particular topic. But now we also have the code serve as, okay, now that you have a base understanding, let's get you to the tool that you need to use to make sure that you're executing your responsibilities. So for conflicts, it's a disclosure tool. In some cases, it may be our policy center to look at a particular policy. In other places, it might be the reporting line that we have if somebody feels, gosh, based on what I'm reading about, I think there might be a misconduct case that took place. We want to make sure employees from the code can get to the tools they need to quickly so they can engage compliance early on in the process, and therefore we can have a good outcome.
No, I really love that. That's something that we've been talking about for a while, is really how do we make the code the gateway to your ethics and compliance program, and really encouraging employees to go there first. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the employee engagement part. But switching over to Deborah now, kind of the same thing. If you could kind of look over the last 3 to 5 years, what's been the evolution, both on the really on the approach side, but if you want to touch on some of the risk topics as well, that's
Yeah,
okay.
and it's relatively easy for us because we've only been a company for 6 years. So we were spun off from Johnson Controls 6 years ago. So big evolution, obviously, since that period of time. We've always taken the approach, what I've always called the digital first approach. So we've never done that sort of static page through PDF or anything like that. We've always treated our code as a website that had all the same links and the ability to navigate around as you would with any website. And that's been really beneficial in terms of helping with employee engagement. And in addition, really leveraging a lot of the best practices over the last 5 to 10 years about incorporating policy links, incorporating Q&A, incorporating case studies, examples, and those kinds of things. We've really taken that approach as well. From a content perspective, not a huge amount of change. I mean, anti-corruption's anti-corruption, conflicts of interest are conflicts of interest. That stuff has been pretty perennial. So we really haven't had any what I'll call significant content changes. Obviously coming up soon, and I think we're going to talk about it, AI and those implications is going to be probably one of the bigger content topics that's going to be updated in the next revision. But really have focused as an evolution on, as the company has updated its values, as it's sort of established itself as its own company, updated branding, straightforward things like that. We've always tried to make sure that the code was right there in lockstep with where the business is overall.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. When I think about where the code fits into kind of the overall hierarchy of behavior and culture, we have our purpose and mission is why we exist, why we enthusiastically get out of bed every morning and come to work. And then the values is how we go about fulfilling that mission. And then the code is really the next level down. It's taking those values and really making them real. And I'm glad you brought up artificial intelligence, because that's a great segue to our next topic. So the next poll question we have is, does your company's code of conduct include guidance on artificial intelligence? Yes or no? And I just came back from the SCCE conference in Nashville, and probably half of the sessions were on AI, which was very interesting. Okay, so we have 33% who say yes and 67% who say no. Actually, you're outperforming the codes that we looked at. Only 15% in our survey said yes, while 85% did not cover it. It was the largest increase. It was a 3 times increase, but still just shows that, and in a lot of the companies that we talk to, they're still trying to figure it out. They don't want to put anything in writing until they know exactly what they're doing, but they're also doing a lot of work in preparation and putting other structures and policies in place behind the code of conduct. And so this time we'll start with Deborah. If you could tell us if your code has AI in it, or coverage of guidance. If not, what are the plans to include that? But also in the context of what's happening with AI within Clarios, and kind of generally how it's being used, and what kinds of guardrails are being put in place, even if it's not mentioned in the code.
Sure. So not yet, but imminently, because we are kicking off our biennial, triennial full review of our code actually within the next couple months. And that is absolutely one of the topic areas that we will be talking about. Timing is good. And in some way, we have timed the update of the code to ensure that before we did that update with the AI guidance, that we had in place the foundational information that we would need to actually provide good guidance. So in other words, we didn't want to necessarily be the leader on this. We wanted to make sure from an organizational perspective that we had AI policy in place, AI governance in place, that we had a good understanding of what the overall corporate approach and stances on AI before we went ahead and embedded that into our code. Because once we put it in there, we hope it stays there for a while. And we've taken, I think, a very enthusiastic but cautionary approach to AI as a company, as a manufacturing company. There's been a big focus on how to incorporate AI into the manufacturing process. In our business, our IT department has done a fantastic job sort of leading the way on this, managing this. training on it and all of that. And so, I feel very comfortable that the timing is very good for us to incorporate at a higher level from a behavioral perspective, AI guidance into our code and have it be relevant to our employees.
Yeah, that's really important. One of the topics that came up a lot during the conference was the governance structure, and I don't know if you could talk a little bit about that, and
Sure.
who kind of owns that, who runs it, who's on the governance, part of the governance committee if you have one.
Ownership is an interesting question, and I'd like to say there's probably lots of or several different functions that have ownership of varying elements of our AI governance. As I'm sure a lot of companies on the call do, we have a governance committee which is multidisciplinary or it's like cross-functional, with IT, with ERM, legal, compliance, and a number of finance, right? A number of other functions that either are heavily impacted by or would definitely have a say in terms of risks and opportunities as it relates to AI for our business. So we do have a governance committee in place. We've got a policy in place, from a high level perspective, and then from a practical or pragmatic perspective, our IT department has taken the leadership in terms of capturing and documenting either uses of AI in the organization or potential uses of AI in the organization, and trying to sort of capture those in a way that enables us to get a good visual of what's happening all around the company.
That's great. Thanks, Deborah.
Mhm.
So the same thing for Christopher. Where are you with the code coverage and also just some of those usage cases that are going on within Cargill and some of the policies and procedures that might be put in place to mitigate the risks?
Sure. So, like many respondents to the survey, likewise, the current version of our code does not address AI, but just as Deborah said for Clarios, same thing for Cargill. Our next refresh, which will be released in early 2026, is going to include some level of guidance in AI, just because of the explosion that's occurring with AI in really the last 12 to 18 months and all of the things that are yet to come. This is an interesting space. My earlier comments talked about how we try when we put information in the code to want it to be reasonably stable so it doesn't require a significant number of updates. This is one of those subjects where that just may not be possible, and it might need to be something that we're going to have to look at on a regular basis, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, just something for us to plan for. Like many other companies, AI is seen as a tool in Cargill that can drive efficiencies, give us a greater flexibility during times of economic uncertainty, and tighter people resourcing efforts that we have. Many areas at Cargill are being asked not only to explore how AI can make certain work be performed more efficiently, but also to kind of record the anticipated cost savings of doing that. And from a time savings perspective, well, then how can that time that's saved be leveraged against something else? And AI certainly is adept at performing a number of different things for efficiency. But as is being talked about now, there are certain guidelines and guardrails that need to be established. And that's certainly an effort that we're participating in. At Cargill, we took a slightly different approach from a governance perspective. Ultimately, our global privacy office was the one to take the lead in raising a hand and saying that they felt it actually belonged with them, mainly because we take the perspective that with all of the customer information that Cargill is entrusted with, AI does represent a risk for that information to leak out of the company, and that would be a privacy issue. So, our privacy office recently rebranded themselves to become the Global Privacy and Responsible AI office. So, they've fully added that. That was with the blessing of our IT group that felt actually the privacy compliance area was well positioned to be able to partner with them and put the appropriate guidance in place, allowing IT to really focus on the mechanics of AI and slow distribution within the company. So we have two internal instances, ChatGPT Enterprise and Copilot 365, which are internal. They're not exposed outside, so they are tightly controlled. They are licensed in that when an individual receives their license, there are certain requirements that they have to fulfill, otherwise the license could be taken away. And primarily the policy that's been put in place from the Privacy Office really can be distilled into three key responsibilities that our employees have if they're going to use a tool like AI: to use only approved tools that are provided by the company, to verify that the responses that AI is providing are accurate, and three, to ensure that the use of AI and the information that it provides ultimately conforms to the expectations of other relevant policies that we have, which are heavily steeped in our values and our guiding principles. So that's the approach that we've taken so far, but I'm sure as AI continues to evolve, we're going to see a lot more, evolving guidance in this space. But certainly in the last 12 months or so, it's been an interesting ride.
Yeah, thanks so much, Christopher. There is a question if from one of the participants. So if we have a standalone policy on AI, should we still address it in the code of conduct? What do you think about that, Christopher?
I would say yes, and the primary reason goes back to a point, kind of at the beginning of the conversation of what we like the code to be. We want the code to be the first resource that an employee goes to, because in many cases it's going to be when an employee is facing a situation in the moment and they don't know exactly where to turn. Maybe they haven't visited the policy center recently, or they don't know who to contact about answering a question. Codes of conduct tend to be the very first place that an employee will naturally gravitate to, which means it's the very first opportunity we have as compliance to get in front of them to say, yes, let's engage, let's get you to the proper resources. So I can understand not wanting to have duplicative information, because then you've got to manage information in multiple places. But I do feel you can provide very simple guidance in the code, because this is the approach that we're going to take, to say, yes, responsible usage of AI is part of our code of conduct and how we do business. And to learn more, go here. So that we can then direct the employee to either a person resource that can help with a very specific question, or a written resource where they can get more specific guidelines on how to use it.
I agree. Any additional thoughts on that, Deborah, from your perspective?
Yeah, I agree with Christopher, and I would say that we view and so I think of it in this way. We have a standalone conflict of interest policy, yet we talk about conflict of interest in the code. We have a standalone anti-corruption policy, but we talk about it in our code, et cetera, et cetera. This is no different. We view the code as setting forth our company values and our expectations around employee behavior that ties to those values, and how things like conflict of interest, anti-corruption, human rights, how that relates to our values in terms of, operating within our company. And then just like Christopher mentioned, there are all embedded within our code are links to the actual policy. So we don't view our code as a policy per se, because we think of a policy as being more prescriptive, more detailed, more do this, do that, do this, do that, you shall not. Where the code is much more, I don't want to use the aspirational, but it's much more expectational. Like, this is why it is important to adhere to these particular standards. Less of a, here's how you shall adhere to these standards, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the employees' insights and what employees think about the code of conduct. So one of the questions that we asked was, have you used your company's code of conduct as a resource? So that's going to be our third poll question. So if everybody can take a few seconds to click whether they've used it as a resource or not. There may be a little bit of a biased audience if we have ethics and compliance professionals online, but that's okay. It's really a good question for you to be asking your employees to find out if they're actually using it as a resource, because that's, as both Christopher and Deborah have said, that's really the first place you want people to go. Okay, look at that, 91%. That is amazing. Crushing the the standard here. I love it. Yeah, so we had 70% of employees this year, increased from 62% in 2024. So what I can assume from that is that all of the work that everyone in the ethics and compliance community is doing to make their codes more useful, to make them useful resources, to communicate about them, to talk about them, is actually having an impact. So we're going to dig into that a little bit with the panelists here. And this time I'll start with Christopher. Um, so what has been your experience and Cargill's experience in employee engagement with the code? Are they using it as a resource? How do you know they're using it? And what kinds of things have you done to try to increase that level of engagement?
Yeah, we really would like our code to be thought of by employees as the doorway to getting help from compliance, kind of an ethical concierge, if you will, where you can approach and you have a question about what should I do in this situation, or where should I go, who can I talk to. The code is the first place to come. So in the way that we've structured the language, in the examples that we've included with some of the topics we cover, we've been very deliberate in making sure that it's accessible, it's understandable, and it suggests that the employee made the right choice, that they came to a place where they can get help. Um, as Deborah mentioned in some of her earlier remarks, also being very purposeful of putting links and guides to get to different places where we can see people using other resources. So while we certainly track overall clicks within our code to get a sense of what's the most popular places of the code where people are visiting, we're also able to track, of course, usage numbers of the tools that they may be directed to. And going back to my earlier example about conflicts of interest, because that was a very deliberate choice to put specific language to direct people to our disclosure tool, the moment that we made that stronger connection in the code, we could see a rise in proactive disclosures of employees. And in some cases, of course, disclosing something they didn't necessarily need to, but we appreciate that anyway, because it's an opportunity first for them to demonstrate that they're trying to do the right thing, and for us to have an opportunity to further educate so that they understand some of the nuances with conflicts of interest. There's a lot more that we're kind of looking to do over the next couple of years with other refreshes to kind of continue that focus. Lastly, I do want to circle back to an earlier point that you made, Jim, in the research that you were presenting, and that's the intentional use of language. Again, I mentioned Cargill does business in 70 different countries. We have 160,000 employees worldwide. And again, with the code wanting to be the central welcoming document and guidance for our employees, it's very important that we're speaking their language. So we've made a concentrated effort to cover as many of the languages as we can with our larger employee populations. And we use right now 24, and that covers right about 95%, we estimate, of the employee workforce in a primary language that they can use. Obviously, there may be some preferred languages that they have, but if they can at least understand either English or a larger language that may be used in a region, that we still consider that good coverage. But it's an investment to do that, but it's also a very good investment because employees like being spoken in a language that's native to them.
And with regarding the metrics, what kind of metrics are you tracking? And as far as engagement with the code, and one of our attendees is wondering if you're reporting any of that data to the board.
So we report more general data to the board of overall compliance health in terms of a lot of the initiatives and programs that we have. However, we do have a more concentrated reporting relationship with each of the businesses that we serve. So on a quarterly basis, we are reporting metrics that represent compliance health for the particular business. And in that sense, we will do incident data, we will do policy access data, we'll do any hotline, reporting data, we'll talk about training data, and we will talk about code data in terms of what are the particular subjects that maybe are getting the most attention. The way we're able to do that through the code is both a combination of general hits that take place, but then once an employee goes to a particular tool that is supported by the code, that's where then their digital identity does get captured as an employee. Each of our employees has a unique digital identifier, and that is used to access one of our systems that might be used for training or policies or other things. So then we can get a better sense at a business level to say, hey, here's a percentage of employees in the last quarter that have, accessed certain things within the compliance tools that we encourage them to use.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I think we could do a whole webinar on that, the metrics piece of it. So Deborah, the same thing as far as your experience with employee engagement and using the code as a resource, and how do you know, and what do you do to kind of keep that engagement up?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So, and I saw a question come in about surveys, and I was actually going to talk about that as well. So certainly we track usage data in and of itself. In terms of responding to the previous question about board, I don't know that that really is a data point that's of particular interest to the board in and of itself. What we do like to do, though, is when we look at usage data, is if you see spikes, right, trying to understand what's driving those spikes, either in a certain region or in a certain time frame, and sort of correlating that data with something else that might be going on, like our annual ethics training and code certification. You will almost always see a spike around that time because we're actively pushing the code out to employees at that time. I actually take a little bit of a different approach when it comes to employee engagement, because we've taken a digital first approach to our code. My vision when we did this was, I don't necessarily feel that employees have to sit there and click through every single page and look at every, all 50 whatever pages if you printed it out of our code. What I was aiming for was that an employee has an issue or concern, I want them to, with the navigation, to be able to very quickly get to that particular topic. And our usage data bears that out, which is exactly what we wanted, right? Our folks should be busy building and selling batteries. They shouldn't be spending, an hour reading our code back to back. And so I'm happy to see that. And then the other thing that we do as it relates to surveys is when we conduct our annual training and certification, we've been doing pre-post surveys, very quick 2-3 question surveys to ask employees before and after within a certain period of time of taking the training to understand if the training is actually being effective, if employees are actually understanding where to find the code, if they're getting any value out of the training itself. And that's all been very positive. And in fact, I'm going to do you one better, Jim. I think you said on your results that 92% of employees engage with the code. We had 96 in our last one. So that's how we're able to track that stuff. But yeah, I think the data is important, probably more for the compliance team, frankly, than for the business, in terms of just understanding, what kind of topics employees are focused on, where there might be concerns, and then again, triangulating that data with other activities to get a sense of, where we're getting leverage and where we're not.
That's fantastic. And, again, that was the vision, I think, that we've had for some time, is that the code should be that place where people go to get the information very quickly. So I'm very happy to hear that that is actually happening in the real world. So we are into our Q&A phase. Thank you, Christopher and Deborah, for all of the great information. There's a question that came in from one of the participants about how do you reach the workers who are more remote? Either they're working in a manufacturing facility, or they're on the road, or they don't have the direct computer access to the code. Christopher, we'll start with you.
And this is one of the primary drivers that let us, better late than never, in my opinion, because I had tried to do this a good 3 or 4 years before finally accomplishing it, to go to a fully digital version, mainly because that digital version could be accessed on a smartphone. So Cargill is a production environment. Out of that 160,000 employees, the vast majority are working in a facility, a factory, a field. They're not issued a laptop. They don't go to a workstation. They have other equipment that they're using. But almost all of them have a smartphone, because just about everybody on the planet seems to have a smartphone these days. And by having our code, which is a public document, be accessible through a smartphone and operate in much the same way as other sites that you would access through a smartphone, we can reach that audience. And there was a very large publicity campaign when we went to a digital code, especially at our business level, to tell our production employees that now they have more direct access to this tool, and that they can get information on the go, on the fly, if they need it. And that's what we have found to be one of the most effective ways to get in front of a population that, while we felt we were serving them in other places, this was one area that we could do better. And having a digital code and being able to have it be mobile enabled has been a big plus for us.
Great. Deborah, how do you reach those employees?
Yeah, same in terms of the code being mobile enabled has been huge. In addition, we have always incorporated a PDF download capability from the digital code. So some people just prefer to operate in paper. It also gives an opportunity for our HR teams, when they are onboarding new folks in the manufacturing environment, they can go to the code, they can print off the PDF to have it as a handout or have it available in, say, break rooms and things like that for access for employees. And that is also, they can be assured that they are getting the most recent version. And like Christopher, we also translate our code into every language where we have more than have more than 10 employees. So we are at 16, I think, and the PDF is also reflective of that too. So the PDF is available to be downloaded in language as well. It's always a little bit of a challenge in a manufacturing environment to reach employees when your primary means of communication is technology, but We found that engaging with our HR team has really helped a lot, because, you know, we don't have compliance people in every plant, but we absolutely have HR people in every plant. So making sure that HR is on board, engaged, aware, has access to those tools, and is utilizing those when they're having those communications or those onboarding with employees has been really important for us.
Yeah, we found in working with and talking to lots of different companies that people are kind of combining, as Deborah said, sometimes people do want something in their hands, so giving them something that they can look at is helpful. But to both Deborah and Christopher's point, having the code in a digital format, in a web-based format, everyone has smartphones now. Most, I don't know, I haven't seen anybody lately that doesn't have one, but especially in the workforce. And so it's kind of like combining old school things like posters in the workplace, but with QR codes where they can scan the QR code and bring the code up. And some of the examples from some of the companies that we've worked with include railroad workers that are doing that, offshore oil rigs, and also retail employees who, when they go back, they don't really have time to read the code, but when they go back in their break room, there's a QR code that can pull it up and find the information that they're looking for. So it's really thinking about how we can combine the physical and the digital world together and make them work to bring those insights and bring that information to people. So we do have a question from Monica that I think is interesting. She wanted to know if you have any experience in integrating any behavioral science nudges into your codes of conduct. That's an interesting question.
I'm happy to speak to this a little bit, or to start off. That's a great question, and something that we really try to utilize in our entire compliance program. And so a key focus for us has been, how do we integrate these kinds of nudges into everyday experiences that our employees have? So I'll use expense reporting as a great example. It used to be you would just get an automated email from our expense reporting system saying, hey, you've got an expense report that you have to approve to managers. We've embedded within that email now a very attractive looking sort of graphical one pager that talks about the kinds of things that managers should be paying attention to when they're reviewing. So, and that comes out with every single email. So rather than us doing a training that says, here are the red flags, right, that happens once a year or every other year, it's a reminder that's coming to managers every time they're having to approve a expense report. So taking that kind of approach is something that we've done. We haven't necessarily incorporated it into the code itself, other than when we are creating our code content, we make sure that we are embedding resources, links to the helpline, links to more detailed policies, links to case studies and things within the content of the code itself. But I don't view the code as something that would drive that specific behavior. It's more of a resource, less a sort of behavior trigger, I guess would be the way that I would describe it. And Christopher, I don't know if you have more to add on that.
Yeah, I'd say the closest example I can think to perhaps what Monica's asking about, in the front part of our code, we introduce what we call the ethical decision model. And it's a simple 3-step model that we ask employees to practice when they feel they may be facing an ethical situation or an ethical decision. And we integrated that model into the code, so it's interactive. You can, in the code, you can go through the model and click it to see how the model works, and ultimately provides you a spec of guidance without getting really specific as to the situation. It basically helps the employee go through a series of questions they need to ask themselves that really help slow down the situation they may be facing, and get them more into a mindset of, okay, what am I going to do about this? What action should I take? So that's as close as I can think of something that we tried to embed in the code that could be used when the person was seeing the code, but also could be a takeaway in terms of some behavioral programming, if you will, that when that employee would come up to a situation, they could remember that model that they saw in the code, and attempt to apply it to that situation. Aside from that, I can't think of any other particular example that would meet that definition.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. You know, we also like to have our codes of conduct really talk about the what, the why, and the how of each issue, and then give each topic, and then give an example. So, you know, what do I need to know? Why do I need to know it? And then specific, what are those kind of specific behaviors that you want me to engage in? But we need to make sure that the managers are modeling those behaviors, because that's where the behavior change really takes place. People take their cues from their direct supervisor. What's going to be important to them, to their supervisor, they're going to say, oh, this is really important. People, if you've ever been in a work group, you can see people starting to reflect whatever it is that that manager is reflecting, whether it's good or bad, right? So I think, you know, getting people to actually live that behavior, not just talk about it. Talking about it's important, but it's also what they do. And if employees see their managers and their leaders and their other colleagues modeling that behavior, I think that's really where you start changing the behavior. There's so many great questions coming in. It's okay, so this is kind of a follow-up, so this may be easy. Stephen is wondering, Chris, if your decision-making model is publicly available.
Yep. So the code document is a public facing document. So if you go to www.cargill.com, you can get to a section of our primary website where you can access the code. So yeah, you would have the ability to see the model that is pushed out there.
And then an attendee had a question for Deborah. You mentioned earlier that your code is designed for ease of use. What else do you find particularly effective for embedding the code into the day-to-day usage?
Yeah, so jumping off of the overall design and structure of the code so that it's we have deep links right into each key area of our code. We embed those links, so it's kind of a cross-reference. In the code, let's use conflicts as an example. We link to our conflict of interest policy. And our conflict of interest policy, we link back to the code as a reference, but we don't link to the code homepage. We link back to the specific page related to conflict of interest, right, from within that policy. We link to the code every quarter when we send out what we call our values in action, which is a PowerPoint deck and talking points that goes to our managers every quarter of a particular ethics and compliance case or topic for them to discuss with their employees. We're always linking to the code in that document. We link to the code or specific sections of the code any place and everywhere that we can. And that's again why when I look at the overall usage metrics of the code, what I'm really looking for is, are people jumping directly into key sections or areas of the code, and what are those? So sort of taking the code not as a monolithic thing, but really looking at it as small chunks of content that can be embedded, that can be linked to from other areas in our program, either through policies or communication, is something that we're always doing.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And this concludes today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining, and a very special thanks to our panelists, Deborah and Christopher. Amazing insights that you've given. Really, I think on the leading edge of everything that we're trying to do. And it's so important for members of the ethics and compliance community to hear from their peers, because I think sometimes, you know, they may listen to you more than they listen to someone like me, even though I was an ethics and compliance professional in-house for 14 years. So I know what it's like to be in your role. But you know, really, really amazing insights. I would like to just remind everyone that we've got upcoming webinars on October 16th, November 13th, and December 11th. And we will follow up to see if we can answer some of the questions that we didn't get to today. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.